Hello and welcome to another Lightwave tutorial on IK Booster. This is part 4 where we're learning about saving and loading poses and motions. So if you haven't seen the other parts, please do so. Alright, so let me load a scene in here for testing. Alright, there we go. So that's my scene right there. Now, with IK Booster, the power of it is you can actually save motions and load motions from here. So let's start with the save motion, save pose, for example. So let me hit Ctrl B to go into IK Booster mode, and then let me go to frame 5 and create a pose here. So I'm going to grab one bone here, create this pose right there, world class pose right there. Alright, so this is the animation that I've created there. Can just tweak it a little bit so that we have that action. Okay, so now let's say I've been animating and I like this pose right here. I want to save it for future use. So what I could do is I could go to let me go to the body itself, the whole character. So whatever object you've selected when saving is the same object you have to select when loading. So make sure that that object you've selected is the parent to all the items that have the motion that you want to save. It must be the top parent. So once it's selected, let me right click and go to motion tools and say pose save. Then it's asking me to save frame 5. That's what I want. So I'll go to the Beatrice, that's the name of the character. So it's a good idea to actually name your files, to start them with the object that you've selected. So in case I had selected a torso bone, for example, you should leave that torso at the beginning so that you know that this motion should be loaded by selecting a particular bone, because it will be in the name. So I'll leave this name here, but just add pose at the end. So it's Beatrice underscore pose and save that. I'm overriding what I already have. So here save frame 5 and say OK. So I've saved frame 5 right there. So with this animation, if I go to frame 0 while selecting the body, I go to frame 10 and click in the timeline to make sure that no other keyframes are selected, because sometimes what happens with IK Booster, some keyframes remain selected, and so when you open up your menu, you find that the menu is very weird because there are some keyframes that are selected that you can't see. They may be away from the timeline, or they could be selected in another mode. So just click in the timeline here in the dope track to make sure that nothing is selected, and then right click on frame 10 and then copy key from current. So I'm copying this current keyframe at 0 to that place. So now I have this animation and it goes back. So I want to get back to this animation that I have saved at frame 5. So I go to frame 15, right click and pose load. And then I go to the same pose that I saved, and I want to load at frame 10. No, I want to load at frame 15. For some reason, it just offsets the whole thing. So let me load at frame, because that's the frame that I actually saved it at. That's why it's giving me that number. Or was it? I'm not really sure what's going on there. Anyway, I'll just say load at frame 15 and say OK, and then the pose is loaded again. So this way you can save a large number of poses and reuse them in your animation to save time. So this same thing can be used to save an entire animation. So like if I like this whole animation up to frame 15, and also, by the way, if you can save poses that look almost nothing like what you want, but they're just halfway there. So that, for example, if I get to frame 15 where I save this pose, I can simply grab a few points and animate this pose, and then suddenly it's a slightly different pose. So it looks more organic. So if, let's say, I love this animation up to frame 15. So I'm going to select the object again, right click and go to motion and say motion save. So this time it will ask me to start from 0 to 20. Now I've found that when saving motions in IK Booster, it's always a good idea to save at frame 0, to start your motion from frame 0 to whatever number it is. It's not a good idea to save your motion from, let's say, frame 20 to another number, because it doesn't save very well. I think that's a bug. So just save yourself some trouble and always make your motions from frame 0 to whatever frame you want. So in this case, I want it to end at frame 15. But also another thing is, if you say to frame 15, it won't save frame 15 itself. So if you want to include frame 15, save to frame 16. So just add one keyframe after the end. So let me click in there. And Beatrice pose, this one is Beatrice motion. So I'm going to save that and hit OK. So now that I've saved that motion, if I enlarge my timeline, I can go to frame 30, for example. Okay, I can go to frame 30 and then right click from there and then go to motion load and then go down here and Beatrice motion and then load that motion. It will ask me to load start at frame 30. Yes, exactly, that's what I want, and then hit OK. So now I have this motion repeated. So this is a very, very powerful tool because you can save a bunch of motions and just load them at will when you want. And then since IK Booster is so easy to manipulate things, you can simply alter this motion one way or another, and that will make it look like a different motion, this one versus this one. So it will look like you spent a lot of time animating these things when actually, yeah, you did not. You were simply just copying and pasting things. Right, so you can load in some very interesting motions. For example, also, if I go to motion options and say motion load, like what I already have here in walking, I have a walk cycle. Okay, so I can have that walk cycle right there. And then what I can do now is select all these keyframes, like from the beginning to the end, and make sure that the keyframe mode is on all item right there. Okay, the menu is wrong, so I have to click a couple of times here until I find the right menu. Just make sure that this is on all item, because whatever you do in here is affected by the keyframe mode. So let me right click here, and let's say I want this animation to loop up to frame 100. So select these walk cycle keyframes, right click and say copy keys, and then on the end there's a start here. Oh, I don't want it to start at frame 53, I want it to start at the end frame, that's 65. So I right click and copy keys again. So now it's starting at okay, yeah, that's 53 actually. Paste at 65. Okay, so it's pasting at 65, but I want it to end at frame 100. Now it won't end at frame 100 itself because it's going to include these keyframes that I have copied in the calculation. So it will be, if these keyframes are, I think this is like 12, a motion of 12 frames, so it's going to be 112 total. So if you want it to end at 100 itself, you can subtract 12 to make sure that it ends at 100. But for the purposes of this tutorial, this is fine. I'll say 100 and say OK. So now it's looped up to 97, is it? Ah, no, not 97. It should be 112 if I'm not mistaken. Yeah, I think it goes up to 112 because it calculates those others as well. Yeah, 112. Alright, so that's how you can loop things from the motions that you've already created. You can loop them and make your animations run faster. Alright, so I hope this helps you with your animations. You can save a huge library of motions and just add them to your character as you animate. That's why it's very important when saving your motions. Don't save the master, this master no. Don't make it part of your motions so that it's always free. In this case, you can actually animate the movement of your character using the master, like that. Okay, so don't include the master in your animations, so that just the body and the bones are enough. That way you get the liberty to actually move your character around, or you use the same one to even turn it around in case you want the character to make a turn while walking. Let me move this a little bit here. Okay, that's a very weird walk cycle, but I think you get the idea. So that's a weird walk cycle anyway, but it gets the point across. So that's all about saving and loading motions, because as you can see, as you have seen in my sample here, when I go to motion load, I've got a ton of motions that I've saved for my projects. So all this helps to speed up animation by a large amount. Alright, so I will see you in another video where we talk about IK Booster some more.